in the entrepreneurial ecosystem building field. For this first session, or the first series, and this first session, we're going to dig into funding models for entrepreneurial ecosystem building. And this series is being co-produced in a collaboration with 4 different organizations, which I want to tell you very briefly about. I am simultaneously speaking and your Zoom operator today, and I'm going to hand this over to one of our partner organizations. But let me pull up our first piece of information. So our first series will explore the story of the New Economy Initiative in metropolitan Detroit, and you will get to meet our guests in just a moment. I would like to thank our partner organizations who are co-producing this with us. The Ecosystem Building Leadership, the organization that I represent, is a new emerging network working to advance the practice and profession of entrepreneurial ecosystem building. It's really coming out of an 8-year effort at the Kauffman Foundation, and a collaborative community effort that has involved over 1,500 people over the last 8 years to really articulate and begin to cement the core tenets of entrepreneurial ecosystem building as a professional field in the United States. One of the outcomes of that work over that last 8 years has been to build relationships with many organizations, national organizations, and our co-hosts for this series include the Startup Champions Network, which is one of the first professional associations for full-time entrepreneurial ecosystem builders, also known as SCN. They will be producing our session on June 19th. A couple SCN members here, which I can see. Also, Make Startups is co-producing with us. Make Startups has a number of programs to support entrepreneurial ecosystem builders nationally, and is doing some pioneering work in funding models around workforce development dollars to fund entrepreneurship support and ecosystem building. And we'll learn more about that in the July 10th session. And then our session today is hosted by Aduba and the Entrepreneurship Funders Network, which is the largest and I believe first national network in the United States of folks who put entrepreneurship at the center of their philanthropic and funder efforts in communities across the United States. So we're going to jump right in. I today will be your host, your Zoom host. Will be controlling the ones and the zeros on the back end, and we will take questions in the chat if you do have questions throughout, and I'll be sharing that. And also we will be opening up at the end, I think, 4 questions, and perhaps Ife and team will be taking questions throughout. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ife Aduba, the Executive Director of the Entrepreneurship Funders Network, to kick off this conversation, introduce our other 2 featured guests, and to take us through this conversation as we explore how the New Economy Initiative in Detroit has developed its story, and how all the exciting work has been funded over almost 2 decades of work. Ife, can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Andy. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I have to say I'm very excited. Andy gave you some background about the Entrepreneurship Funders Network, so I'm not going to bore you with any more details about that. I will invite you to visit our website if you'd like to learn more, and you can always track me down and ask me questions because I'm very happy to talk about it. It is a project that I have loved working on and I'm excited about, partly because I'm excited to be able to work with the people that you're going to hear from today. So I am going to not waste a lot of your time. I will echo Andy's suggestion that you can drop some stuff into the chat if you have questions or comments along the way, and we're going to do our best to try and cover those. We'll pay attention to that as closely as possible, but I don't want to waste any time. I am very excited about this conversation, and I get to talk to these 2 women a decent amount, but there's just like one of my favorite things when I started with EFN was learning about the New Economy Initiative. And I think that really cool and unique backgrounds that both of these women have and what they've managed to accomplish in Detroit. So I'm excited to have 2 EFN members, Pam Lewis, who I have to also say thank you because Pam serves on the EFN board and fields a decent number of questions and comments from me. So thank you to Pam for that. But Pam Lewis with the Hillman Family Foundations out in Pittsburgh, and Wafa Dinaro with a New Economy Initiative now. I am going to let these 2 ladies, who you will see are incredibly capable human beings, take it away, tell you more about themselves, and get us through a little bit of background.
Thank you, Ife, and thank you, Andy, for the introductions. I am gonna see if I can share my screen and get us started. So we are going to be talking a little bit about NEI, going through, we're going to be doing it a little bit backwards. We're going to talk about what we're doing now, and then Pam will kind of talk about our origin story and tell a little bit about the history, which is, not normally how we talk about organizations, but you're going to get, this is how we're going to do it. So I see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you to all the Michigan people who are on the call. We are clearly representing the folks in Michigan. You guys showed up strong, so thank you for being here. A little bit about the New Economy Initiative. First, what we're going to do, we're going to give you just a brief overview of what NEI is, who we are. We're going to talk about the evolution, and then we're going to talk about some of the toolkits and case studies that we have done. So the New Economy Initiative is really centered around building a resilient and equitable economy in the Detroit region. The history of Detroit has been very prosperous, and then we had some economic downturns. And as the saying goes in Michigan, when the United States has a cold, Michigan gets the flu, and we've really been at the center of that storm. And NEI was really created to try and figure out how, when there is an economic downturn in the country, that we don't get the flu and that we're able to fare better than we have historically. So a little bit about me, Wafa Dinaro. I am the current executive director of NEI. I come from a range of public, private background, with my previous role being the economic development director in Wayne County, which is the largest county in the state of Michigan, which also includes the city of Detroit. Pam Lewis is my predecessor at the New Economy Initiative, and has really done was really a part of laying so much of the groundwork and the scaffolding for the organization, for us to be where we are and to have as much success as we've had. So a little bit on Michigan and the Detroit region. You've heard all kinds of things in the news, I'm sure, about Detroit and about Southeast Michigan. Some are less flattering than others, but Michigan has really become an incredible place to start and grow a business. We have done the work to make it so entrepreneurs of color have the resources, have access to be able to do the work, and really have transformed where small businesses, where the success is with small businesses. There's still a lot of work to do. The work definitely doesn't end, but we're starting to change the narrative, and eventually the entire country and the entire world will know that Detroit and Michigan are the places to go to start and to scale a business. We're getting pretty close to being there, but there's still some work to do. And people in Michigan know that Michigan is the place to be. Now we just need to get all of those, the rest of the country to know how awesome we are. So our approach is really rooted in collaboration. And I can't stress enough how important it is that it's taken an incredibly long time to build this collaborative ecosystem. And we currently the NEI team is split into two separate offices. Half of our team lives at the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, where we do the grant making, where we do the data collection and the work, and the other half of our team sits at Invest Detroit, and that is the business support network office, and that's where we convene all of our ecosystem partners, and those are grantee partners as well as non-grantee partners that are a part of the ecosystem. And when I say we convene, we meet every other week via Zoom. We meet once a quarter in person. We do monthly lunch and learns. And then we do at least 3 to 4 less formal, little informal happy hours to convene the ecosystem, to be able to talk about what's happening, to be able to really discuss and get into the nitty-gritty of how to solve problems collectively and not as individual organizations. And we've been able to really move the needle on issues that are impacting entrepreneurs by bringing multiple organizations to the table and collectively working to solve the issues. So how do we do our work? I know this slide looks a little crazy, but these are all of our grantee partners. Our partners are much larger, but these are the folks that NEI is giving funding to. We divide our work into 3 buckets. We have mission lenders that are a part of our granting portfolio. We have technical assistance providers. These are, the coaches, the accounting help, the retail boot camps, all of the hands-on support that's being provided to entrepreneurs. And then what I think is our most important bucket is what we call trusted connectors. This group of organizations are embedded in their communities, and they are either geographically located or they are like ethnically or language-based organizations. And these organizations are really the connectors. And just like the term trusted connectors, they bridge the gap between entrepreneurs and the other 2 buckets, the mission lenders and the technical assistance providers. So these organizations are embedded in their community. They know when entrepreneurs need additional support, and they can go and hold their hand and say, hey, I know this great program that'll support you with your needs. And they walk them over to the mission lenders or to the technical assistance providers. And this group has really been, has been like the crux of the work and has been fundamental in making and getting to results for the work. So I talked a little bit about convening and how important it is for our work. We convene 2 main groups. One I touched on a little bit with the NEI work table. This is the group of business support organizations that we convene every other Tuesday, and then we convene once a quarter in person. What's come out of the work table are also different work group streams. So when we talk about capital in the larger work table group, we talk about specific issues, and then we create work streams where we develop pilots, where we develop programming, where we develop, really tangible programs to solve those issues. The other convening that we lead is what we call the Michigan Microbusiness Coalition. And this is a statewide coalition. Generally, all of the work we do is in Southeast Michigan, except for the Policy Coalition. This is statewide, and we really look at some of the structural and government issues facing microbusinesses, and we work to change policy around microbusinesses. And we do this at the state, we do this at the city, and we do this at the county. And this looks like, asking the state to allocate more funding, which we were able to allocate $75 million to the small business ecosystem through state advocacy. This also looks like going to the city of Detroit and saying, it takes 75 steps to get a restaurant to open in the city. How do we take that down to 5 steps, and working with the city to streamline their licensing and permitting processes to make it easier for entrepreneurs to do business in the city and in the surrounding communities. So we are a funder. We also fundraise, and the funding that we give to our partners has been really a part of the work that we do, but it's only a piece of the work that we do. We are really active and engaged in the ecosystem. We collect and do research to understand where the gaps are, and we actively work with our grantees to fill those gaps and to find solutions to the problems. So we are not just funding organizations and saying, we'll see you in 6 months when we want to report. We are actively walking the programs with them. We are actively building, and we are actively working to ensure we have a collaborative, successful ecosystem with the entrepreneur at the core of everything that we do. And then I want to talk a little bit about our impact since 2009. because it's been absolutely incredible. And we've had a couple changes in the way that in our, I don't want to say in our vision or mission, but we've kind of pivoted a little bit throughout the years, and I'm not going to talk about that because I know Pam is. But we have done 766 grants since 2009 to nonprofits supporting entrepreneurs in Southeast Michigan. We've done a total of $148 million in grants, and we've supported very conservatively, and I think this number is a little bit higher, but you know, the way we track data, at least 37,997 companies in Southeast Michigan. Pam, I think, am I kicking it to you here?
Yep, this is it.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Pam Lewis. I served with NEI from 2010 to 2021 and I think some of my colleagues who worked alongside me are on the call. And I think Don Jones is here and Mary Fulmer, who's actually still with NEI. I'm now in Pittsburgh, a grant maker here, supporting a lot of entrepreneurship here. But today I'm focused on Detroit, my hometown, a town that I love and miss. The NEI story is a big story. When we talked to Andy and Ife about the conversation today, we wanted to look at this from the standpoint of what is the story of NEI, but also the evolution of NEI and its work around ecosystems, and how does that work get funded? And so the evolution story is going to focus on that. So in the leadership of the Community Foundation convened a group of Michigan foundations to combine grant-making resources to form the New Economy Initiative. They didn't create it to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Keep in mind, and this is 2007, there's a time when the region was at a very severe economic crisis. And I keep bringing up the Community Foundation because the Community Foundation was really the creator and originator of the concept of NEI, and then worked to rally 9 other foundations that put up $100 million into the initial pot. This was unprecedented. It was the grants dollars were housed at the Community Foundation, but the other foundations served as advisors in terms of how the money would work. It was never designed to be a standalone organization. It still isn't a standalone organization. It was envisioned to be the strategic grant-making project. And remarkably, when you think about it, for something like this to be turning 18 this year, speaks to its value and its impact. So the name of the 10 foundations are on the screen here. And we work through, and so I'm going to walk you through kind of the evolution of how it started and then the phases of the work through 2021. You can go to the next slide, Wafa. So in 2007, the funders actually took a year to think through what's the shared vision that we're going to work to. This is very unprecedented, where the $100 million really showed up before the strategy. I know we're recording this. I guess it's out now that that's what happened. But I think it goes to show that sometimes you have to take time to think about what the pillars of focus are going to be and not be so stuck to it that they can't change. But when it started, the original pillars were focused on 1, promoting a successful entrepreneurial infrastructure. That's what we called it at the time. Now we would call it an ecosystem. 2, capitalizing on existing regional assets and resources, what's happening already in the region, how can we support those things, and then building and employing a more skilled and educated workforce. All the intent of this was to position this single sector auto town into a thriving economy that has new economy careers. So that's at the basis of why the foundations thought they could use grant dollars to support something like this and work alongside the things that they typically did with arts and culture, health and human services, education. But this was them stepping out of their box to say, you know what, if we put a pool of money together, can we influence the economy over the next few years to be a more advanced economy than it was? Keeping in mind, this was during a very severe implosion of the automotive industry. So by 2016, this process and this strategy evolved, moving beyond the 3 pillars to support really a small business, 100% entrepreneurial strategy. And it was one that was focused primarily, not only, but primarily on disadvantaged entrepreneurs, women, people of color, low-income entrepreneurs. And we evolved from focusing on tech to focusing on small businesses. In most cases, like Wafa talked about throughout the years, the focus of NEI shifted as the region experienced success due to our grant making. For example, as Southeast Michigan began to experience more activity with new tech venture development, venture capital coming into the market, because a lot of NEI's early investments were really focused on the tech side of the space. We migrated our strategy to focus on small businesses led by more diverse entrepreneurs, small businesses in the most distressed parts of the region, with an emphasis on the city of Detroit. And we also made decisions to move from workforce, because there's a lot of people playing in the workforce space, but we thought we could have a greater impact if we just solely focused on entrepreneurship. And throughout all of these shifts, NEI did stay true to this guiding principle about making sure the region was willing to support all populations, independent of the demographic or geographic representation, and having opportunities to start or grow a business. Because we knew that this is what it was going to take to move the needle of the economy, not just for the place, but also for the people in that place. So I want to walk you through the 3 phases and then tie it back to the case for funding with each phase, because that's what the focus of today is about. So each phase required a new level of funding. And each phase retooled its strategy, like Wafa mentioned, to work towards a goal of recapturing lost jobs, revitalizing the entrepreneurial support structures, and changing the culture to make sure that we had this strong and more diverse economy. So the first phase, this was 2007 through 2012. This is the first 100 million that I talked about. I joined around 2010. And this phase, like I said, a year of it was spent with the funders thinking through what they were going to do. And after that was done, started making these initial investments in grants to catalyze a strong entrepreneur service system. The foundations rallied to put the first 100 million together. 75% of that actually came from 3 national foundations that had an affinity for Detroit: Kresge, Ford, and Kellogg Foundation. And then local foundations filled in the gaps. Some of the key programs that resulted with that first set of funding, and this could go on for hours, but I want to highlight 3 really important programs that have thrived and are still existing today. And I would call the but-for NEI funding programs. TechTown. I don't know if anyone of you on this call have heard of TechTown Detroit. If not, you should Google it. But a lot of the NEI funding not just supported the programs at TechTown, it also supported saving the building and helping TechTown to become this nice, gray life science place that was serving a few entrepreneurs to the vibrant, thriving, colorful, inclusive entrepreneur support organization that right now is serving 1,000 or more entrepreneurs a year. I mean, this is significant. And I think if you were to ask TechTown, and maybe someone from TechTown on the call can put in the chat, the percentage of people of color and women that they serve will knock your socks off. Again, programs like this did not exist prior to NEI funding. Another example would be Prosperous. Prosperous, which actually started from a national model and evolved to be a CDFI. They were focused on immigrants and people of color unapologetically, located in Southwest Detroit. And they now are giving loans directly, have gotten their CDFI certification, and are supporting probably 200 or so businesses a year. And then the last example I want to give is something that was called the First Step Fund. This is all the first phase of NEI. The First Step Fund sits inside of Invest Detroit, which is a large CDFI. It's now called ID Ventures, but this was a venture fund designed for Detroit-based tech ventures. This had never been done before. And since its launch, it was seeded with $5 million from NEI. And since its launch in 2009, probably has invested over 200, I think in 200 businesses they've invested in $37 million. They've had 22 exits. This was set up as an evergreen fund. So when those companies exit, the money goes back into the fund. And with 1 or 2% of VC monies going to Black and Brown founders, here with ID Ventures, I think the number is probably up to 15 or more %. Just a few examples. Now let's move on to phase 2. Phase 2 was 2013 to 2016. Another $38 million was raised. This is where NEI started prioritizing grant making to support entrepreneurship that included not just the tech startups, but also included the bin-ups, we used to call them. I think maybe you guys still call them that, but the bin-ups meaning Main Street businesses in low-income areas. This is where NEI started thinking about an ecosystem structure that would connect those that are serving entrepreneurs in a better way. And this is where NEI started talking about collecting data and having a methodology that could collect grantee information so that it could demonstrate its impact. The case for funding with this, NEI was set up to be a temporary thing, but because it had taken so much time to figure out this 100% entrepreneurial structure, the funders agreed that we needed more time to prove that out. And so certain key funders, though, acted as champions to help raise the second round. When the NEI team thought about this phase 2 strategy, they had representatives from Kresge Foundation at that table with us, working through the strategy so that the funders actually became the champion to make sure that the next round was raised. This is the phase where we added new funders too. Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation joined us, and the William Davidson Foundation joined us. Key grants under this phase had to do with micro-lending programs focused on women and people of color, Michigan Women's Forward, Detroit Development Fund. This is where Don Jones did a lot of work to start to engage community development corporations. Wafa talked about them as trusted connectors. These were organizations with relationships in the community with small businesses and equipping them to be like a resource navigator and a trusted point of entry for businesses to find help through the rest of the ecosystem. This is a phase where we brought in national models like Endeavor, Bunker Labs, Venture for America. This is also the phase where NEI started doing its own programming, and we launched a small business competition called NEI Ideas, which is where we were making small grants to actual existing businesses. And this was probably one of the most powerful things we ever did, because it really demonstrated that inclusion mattered to us, that we were lifting up these existing business owners that thought entrepreneurship was always focused on just the startups. And this was the phase where we ownershiply collected so much data that pissed the grantees off, but it was also the data that influenced how we demonstrated impact to raise even the next round. Last phase, phase 3, the last phase that I was a part of, I should say, they're on now, phase 4. This was 2017 to 2021. This was also the phase of the pandemic. This was the phase where we started to formalize the ecosystem. What I mean by that is the grantees that were receiving money from NEI, these entrepreneur service organizations, the work tables and the neighborhood work table that Wafa talked about earlier. This is where members of the team, Don Jones and others, began to formally gather these people and work on solutions to make them better servers of these small businesses. This was also where a lot of pandemic relief happened, and the phase where NEI started its influence on state policy. Wafa has taken it to a whole nother level, but this is where we began to say, hey, state, you talk about small businesses being up to 500 employees, but most of the businesses that our grantees touch are under 10. There needs to be more segmentation. And this is a phase of a lot of storytelling. And like I mentioned before, the $29 million, the case for funding, I believe, was attributed to the ability to demonstrate impact. And we could demonstrate impact because we were collecting data. But it wasn't just data on how many jobs are created. It was data that showed that the network was working. It was data that had stories and narrative and surveys that demonstrated that something was happening here and that these businesses were growing. Under this phase, this was a neighborhood work table. I talked about that, the pandemic relief. This is the phase where we started a very incredible storytelling campaign called In Good Co Detroit. This is the phase where we decided to capture our own learnings because people were starting to ask, how does this happen? How do you do this? This is where we formalized the NEI Insights website that Wafa can direct you to and tell you more about. And just a few more slides. If you go to the next slide. And I can't see anybody, so if you're asking questions, we'll get to them after. Let's talk about ecosystem building for a minute. As I said earlier, the concept of ecosystems was not a concept for us when this work started. Understanding the practice of what that meant took off at about 2014. And I want to give a shout out to Andy Stoll and his team at Kaufman at the time, because we were doing this work, but we really didn't understand what we were doing, and we didn't have language for it. But there was little to no guidance on what an ecosystem building was or how to do it. We didn't know it, and we didn't know what to call it. But there are these 3 conditions that I want to put up for you if you're thinking about ecosystem work and how to fund it, that drove why we considered an ecosystem approach. And they're on the screen there. But before I do that, I want you to look at this picture. This picture is an example of what Wafa talked about NEI playing a role that's more than grant making. What you see in this picture are a group of NEI grantees, entrepreneur service organizations that are doing an exercise around who do you know and how are you referring entrepreneurs from one to another. And we had a ball of yarn. And basically, if you referred to that person across the room, you would toss the ball and they would hold on to it. And you can see the network come alive. That image alone floored the funders. And that's what I mean by demonstrating impact that's always beyond data, et cetera. But the 3 things that motivated us. So we were making grants to multiple organizations supporting entrepreneurs. And too often, these organizations were, in their proposals, had programs that another organization was already doing. And it didn't seem as if they were aware of each other's services. It didn't seem as if they were aware they even had relationships. That was one factor that made us know that we needed to have more of an ecosystem approach. We sensed that entrepreneurs were not aware of these resources and have wasted a lot of the time finding the right fit for their needs, because they walk into one door, and if that door doesn't know where to send them and they can't help them, that is time wasted for that entrepreneur. And then we also, as a grant maker, we needed a structure to measure the impact of this work so that we could continue to feed the funding for it. And that was best done in an aggregate way. And we needed to be able to show that this is a tool that can increase the local economy, increase financial incomes for people, and give opportunities for all people to start and grow a business. Now let's talk about a miss and a win. So the next slide, thank you. One of our biggest misses, I would say, and those of you who are involved, we can agree to disagree or debate this, but I don't think we really started this work by centering the entrepreneur's needs purely in the middle of the conversation. We made sure the system of support was visible with the grantees. We made sure those grantees were connecting. We left it to them to be these really accessible points of entry. We worked hard to make sure those referral pathways happened. But looking back, and also in the work that I'm doing now, is just more should have been done to place the specific needs of the entrepreneurs in the middle of the conversation, to help identify gaps in the system, and also make sure that the ESOs are delivering the most relevant and impactful services to them. So if you're thinking about this in the future, you know, in your own space, I'd say make sure that entrepreneur is being centered, make sure their needs are being centered, and you're not only relying on the ESO leader to tell you what those needs are. One of the biggest wins. Now I'm a data nerd, so this is about funding. One of the biggest wins, in my opinion, is the fact that we started collecting data early. By 2013, we were asking grantees for information. Later, we were asking them for their client information. What are the jobs? What are the incomes of the revenue of these businesses? What industries are they in? And this type of constant data collection, if there's investments being happening or loans being happening, how much is happening with that? That helped us define an economic impact, do an economic impact study, inform an economic impact story that showed the funders that this was something to be reckoned with. So that's the history. Again, you know, another one I would say is the trusted connector play. I think NEI was fortunate to have members on our team that had different types of skill sets. And, you know, if you're talking about ecosystem work, you need to have a person that understands community engagement, that understands how to rally, really understands and has the patience for it. And that I think was another big win, because ecosystems only move, everything, we all move at the speed of trust. And so you need to have someone that has that skill set that can continue to build that trust. And that's all I got. So back to you, Wafa.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. So thank you for that, Pam. We're going to open it up for questions in just a little bit. But before we do that, I wanted to share our most recent annual report. There's a QR code. I'll leave this up here for just a couple seconds if you want to take a picture. It's really, it looks amazing. And Chanel Stitt, who's our communications person on this call, is responsible for that. So I want to make sure that, you know, we are showing it to everybody, because it's pretty incredible. And then we are going to share these slides out, right, Ife? There's a couple resources in here. Yep, we are going to share these slides out. There's a couple resources back here with just some tools. Pam mentioned any insights. That is really where we mapped out the story, the wins, the losses, the what worked, what didn't work. It's a great resource if you're looking to build something similar in your community. Because it takes all the lessons learned and you don't have to learn them the hard way. You can just read it and not do the things that that didn't work. And then some of the other case studies, it's all on any insights. So please check it out, take a look. This is really talking about the early part all the way to 2021. And it goes through all of the learnings, all of the case studies of NEI. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kick it back to Ife, who I think has some questions.
I do. And I know, I'll just reiterate, we'll take questions from the audience. So if anybody wants to start popping things into the chat, that's fine. I know I've had a few conversations, and frankly, I've been in some of them with Andy over the last couple of weeks talking about the charitability of entrepreneurship. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process of getting philanthropic foundations to understand that entrepreneurship was a really important and vital tool for them to use to achieve the charitable outcomes that they wanted. And I'm kind of curious, like looking between the two of you, that journey through time, what some of that might have looked like at the start. Are there things that you think kind of continue to hold true, what you might change in terms of how you would talk about it today? Or if everybody's just on board?
I can start, and I'm going to kick it over to Don Jones to to answer this question.
I forgot to warn the audience.
I'm going to pick
Pam
on
is going to
Don.
call on folks in the
Yeah.
audience.
If I see you and I know you know part of the story, I may ask you to expound on things, but I'll start it. You have to remember in 2007, Southeast Michigan was hit. You know, the automotive industry was imploding and the whole region, there's a stat that says the percentage of, what was it? You know, I don't know, of the highest percentage of jobs lost in the manufacturing industry were actually lost in Michigan. I can't remember what the number is anymore, but it was high. And so you not only had people that maybe were low income and didn't have jobs already, but you also had people that were used to having jobs out of jobs. NEI was born out of that. So the original discussions around charitable purpose, because foundations supporting entrepreneurship was not a thing. Northeast Ohio had started doing it with the Third Frontier and Jumpstart and those guys. But the basis was that this is an economy that is broken. And so if philanthropy continues to fund arts and culture and education and health and human services and placemaking in an economy that's broken, that no one has jobs, what's the point? It's like putting your money in a bag with a hole in it, right? And so this was the motivation for philanthropy to come up with that first 100 million. How we got away, not got away, but how the tech focus started, because it was about positioning the region to improve its economy. The Main Street focus was about positioning the individuals in a region to have financial stability, right? But these were the things that were the basis of the charitable purpose. And we actually had to work with lawyers to sort that out. As an example, that First Step Fund that I talked about, to put, you know, money into ventures. Why would philanthropy ever do that? Well, philanthropy would do that in Southeast Michigan and Detroit at the time because it was a broken economy, and we're trying to move the region through innovative entrepreneurship, right? Later it changed because once the region started doing better, we didn't feel like the charitable purpose to support tech purely was enough. But if it was tech in service to diversity and inclusion, that was different. But it was more charitable to focus on Main Street, because now we're talking about individual wealth building, financial security, and people in distressed areas. So that's how I would start that conversation. And I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. I do mean it. If you're on the call and you were part of the story, you should feel free to chime in.
I'm easy to pull into.
I knew it. I knew he'd do it. This is Don Jones. We worked alongside this for over 10 years. And so it's good to see you, Don.
Nice to see you, Pam and Wafa. Good to see you both. I'll add everything Pam said is true. I think what the message that I think we had trouble getting across is a corollary to what Pam said, which is that economic growth in metropolitan Detroit, and I would say this is probably true in all legacy cities, it's not, are we going to support tech or high growth, or are we going to support neighborhood businesses? It is an and strategy. You need to have strong neighborhood businesses in order to become a place that's attractive to high growth businesses. You need to bring high growth businesses in order to bring the customers that neighborhood businesses have. So to work on those two things simultaneously is absolutely important. And I think we had trouble articulating that message in the beginning because we didn't understand the message in the beginning. We were learning that through. And I think also today it resonates more, or is more difficult, is this idea on serving historically underserved communities, women, Black and brown folks and such like that. If I had to say the message today, what were we all about? And I think this is what everybody should be talking about when they're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. When somebody asks you the purpose of your program, the answer to me is just a one-word answer. It's about excellence. Full stop. That's why these programs are so important, because you are building excellence. And the only way you build excellence is by doing this and/or strategy and reaching these neighborhood businesses.
Perfect. Thanks.
I do see something in the chat from SJ Murdoch, and hopefully you're feeling better. I know you're off screen and you explained at the beginning, but I would love to hear more about your data collection processes and response rates. My experience has been that entrepreneurs and small business owners can be notoriously difficult to collect data from due to their understandably busy schedules and tunnel vision on their work.
You want to start, Pam?
We're doing rock, paper, scissors. I can start and then you can take, because you have a view of what's going on today. The data collection part was very onerous and we learned a lot because we over collected. But we weren't collecting it from the entrepreneurs. It was hard collecting it from the entrepreneur service organizations. And in some respect, as a funder, we know that people, like if the state is funding you, you're reporting on these things. But it was a challenge. But we were relying on the entrepreneur service organizations who first started giving us data that was summarized. We saw 100 entrepreneurs this year. We started asking for, who are the 100 entrepreneurs? Where were they at when they met you in terms of revenue and employee numbers, and where were they at in a year? And so that it wasn't directly from the actual entrepreneur, it was through the ESOs. But collecting that data and the industries that they were in is what was fed to PricewaterhouseCoopers and other consultants that was able to give us an official economic impact report that started to show the region, not just the funders, but the other economic development people that were busy just counting jobs, that supporting these types of entrepreneurs also has economic impact. And I think the number was like $2 billion or something like that. But if we hadn't collected the data, we wouldn't have known. Go ahead, Wafa.
Yeah, I would just double thumbs up to what Pam said. It's collecting data from the business support organizations. It's challenging in very different ways. We have some organizations that are really small and might not have the capacity to collect the data, and encouraging them to collect the data has had its own challenge. And then you have other organizations, the larger ones, who are already collecting this data because they have federal grants or they have state grants, and they want to collect it in a way that's easy for them. So figuring out a way to make the data collection easy on everybody has really been an iterative process. Every year we adjust it a little bit to make sure we're collecting data that's helpful, but not super difficult for the BSOs to collect. We are also currently building a platform with a CRM system to be able to make that data collection a little bit easier, especially for the smaller BSOs in our ecosystem.
We got a couple more questions in the chat, but I'm hoping real quickly you can touch on a little bit about getting foundations to work together rather than go off and do something on their own. Because I think certainly what you've laid out for us is possible because you got foundations to work together. So if you could talk a little bit about that and both the start of it and the maintaining of it, I think.
I'll start with maintaining it, and then we can go backwards.
Yep.
So it's always a challenge to keep philanthropy interested in something that might be working, but has been around for a really long time, because they want the next big, nice, shiny project that they can put their name on. So it's always a challenge to say, like, look, this is the data, these are the results we're having. And then there's always the conversation of, but, can we push you guys to do more tech, or can we push you guys to do some workforce? So there's always a little bit of a push and pull, and we are very consistent in, this is our lane, this is the work that we're going to do. And, we want philanthropy to stay the course and to continue to support this work. And we make sure that we do that by showing them the impact and going back to the data piece, collecting lots of data and showing them that, look, your investment into NEI has resulted in this many businesses being supported. And you know what, let's go take a tour of this neighborhood and let's show you this business. Let's go get coffee at this business that NEI has supported. and showing them to keep them engaged and involved in the ecosystem.
And the way that it started, my note about champions, like if you're raising money to support these types of initiatives and these ecosystems, to think that a leader of an ecosystem project can go and raise this level of money is misguided. You have to have funder champions. NEI was fortunate that Mary Nolan, who ran the Community Foundation, was the original funder champion, right? Now, she didn't put the most money in, but she was the one who rallied and made the deals with the other 9 foundations. For each of those rounds, the NEI staff provided the case and was there to explain the case, but we always went with a funder champion. And so those funders, and in the case of NEI back in 2000, the early days, none of them were in an entrepreneurial grant-making space. So this was something where they were coming out of their normal work to do together. But I also think, comparing to what I'm experiencing now, I think the region was in such a dire need that what they could do together to help the region mattered more than having authorship, right? And how that's maintained, is the good work that Wafa and Mary and Chanel and their team are doing now. But that was at the core of it. But the funder champion, if you think I run this organization and I'm going to go rally foundations to do this together for me, no, you're wrong. You have to find that one funder that goes with you, because when they talk to their peers, that's when they'll listen.
Thank you. We had a question from Lindsay Ryan, and I love this question. I thought it was great that you called out the miss in terms of the centering of entrepreneurs. So could you talk a little bit more about the centering of entrepreneurs? And I'm kind of curious, like this, really thinking about like that shift, and if there's any, like, just pay attention to this for folks who are doing the work today. Have you seen other groups that have done this really well? Wafa, that's you.
Pam is putting me on the spot.
Lily Hamburger's on the call too,
Is she still on the call?
I'm
So,
here.
Do you want to take this?
Yes, I can. And I will turn my camera on, although I am on my phone. Hello, everyone.
Introduce.
Yes, I will. I'm Lily Hamburger. I am the director of the Business Support Network Office, which, as Wafa mentioned, is the convening arm of the team that has been around since 2021. So I live and breathe every day kind of the community aspect of our ecosystem and the power that has been described of what can result from that. Some of the things that I've learned in my tenure here, I joined the team in 2022, is that there are folks that operate in sort of serving as bridges for our entrepreneurs. Those are the trusted connectors at our ESOs, and they are able to articulate a lot of times what their clients' needs are. And yet there's nothing like hearing it from the business owners themselves. And so having places where business owners can come together to talk amongst each other, to share resources, and to also engage entrepreneurs in co-creating and in some cases leading programming in partnership with ESOs has been really powerful for us to recenter their experience and their voices in this community. So some of the ways that we've done that have been bringing entrepreneurs to speak at some of our convenings and talking about their lived experience directly to our audience and of business support professionals, and then having the audience discuss and react to that. In some cases, we've had real-time problem solving of their issues with them sitting at a round table with ESOs and tackling it together. And in other cases, there have been individual entrepreneurs that have been paid by ESOs to help design programming and lead programming. And I think just one of the things that I just want to double click on that has been said several times is like creating space for people to convene and work together is the most powerful lesson to take away from NEI, whether it's ESOs or business owners themselves. And I think that's kind of the frontier for us, is how do we create more spaces for entrepreneurs to come together and not feel as lonely in their journey as entrepreneurship often can be. So yeah, thanks for including me.
Thanks, Lily. A question from Scott. Can you share your ESO questions, especially around job? We have learned workforce utilization includes rates, directly employed, part-time, contract, ... which suggests much more. Thoughts around ESO questions?
I'm just piggybacking on your response from earlier that workforce utilization was one of the pillars of your original investment agenda. The measurement in most ecosystems is sloppy. And a business may hire for 3 years a group of people, but after that, it may decline. So talking about it as if the first 2-year trend is 50% growth is foolish if later on that's not the case.
Yep.
So I'm curious, because most ESOs are funding hungry and impact is based on data. At least I heard one of you is a data junkie. And if that's the case, building support for jobs is terrible if they're $20 an hour jobs and you're trying to build a tech industry.
Yeah, those are really good comments. A couple things. I'm just going to ramble a little bit. One, we never set targets for our entrepreneur service organizations to meet certain things. We were building what did we used to say? Building the plane while it was flying. So we left targets off the table. The other thing too is there was a moment where we collected data on, we wanted to understand jobs, but we didn't hang everything on jobs. Because if you're talking about, even if you're talking about a tech business, that's not going to promote a bunch of jobs. And if you're talking about a mom and pop business, that might be 2 or 3 jobs. But some of the things that we learned, and I think JP Morgan Chase put this report out in 2016 that talked, it was a study of Detroit, Chicago, California, and some others, that if every existing small business in the city of Detroit just added 2 or 3 more jobs, it would have drastically changed unemployment in the city. And so again, our data didn't hang on just jobs. The other thing we were trying to influence was culture change. And that's the hardest thing to measure. But how do people feel about entrepreneurs? When the NEI work started in 2007, entrepreneurs were people that couldn't get a job anywhere else. I mean, because this was a very employed, large corporate town, right? But through the promotion of entrepreneurship, through the celebration of entrepreneurship, through talking about the value of entrepreneurs, that thinking and mindset around what an entrepreneur is in the city of Detroit, it actually changed. The other thing is, what do entrepreneurs look like? Showing the pictures that entrepreneurs weren't just, I love the young white guys with the skinny jeans, but they're entrepreneurs that look different than them, right? They look like the people on this call. And so showing those faces was also very important. And that also is a way of tracking progress. So it wasn't just about jobs. It was about jobs. It was about the flow of loans and venture dollars to businesses, because the assumption is the flow of that would grow businesses. And it was also about the stories and the visuals, so that you could see this was a culture of supporting entrepreneurship that was different than it had been in the past.
Paul, did you want to add anything? Or are we
I
letting
think
Pam just do that?
I think Pam did a good job.
Um, I have a quick question, Pam, and I just want to call this out because, frankly, it was kind of you, me, Roxana, also from NEI, and some other folks in Philly talking about the storytelling aspect. And I do think there's, right, a lot of beauty to the work and this telling of the story of NEI. And I think just maybe a quick comment or reminder about like the level of work that is involved in that, just so folks acknowledge it and don't think it's a quick add-on. At the end of the day, we whip together a story sort of thing.
I'll start, but I'll tell you, Wafa and Mary and Chanel, if you look at their impact report, they
Yes.
can definitely build on that because, you know, people have to see what you're doing, and the storytelling allows people to do that. And people have to believe that you mean what you're saying, and the storytelling allows you to do that. And so we began to build into the budget of NEI work to pay for people who could interview entrepreneurs, go out, take professional images of them, not just images on their phone. We, you know, podcasters, you know, videographers to tell that story. And there's a good body of work that has that. But Wafa, you could just share, because if you just,
Yeah.
even how their
Next
impact
slide.
report looks,
And it is a
tells a
beautiful
story.
report.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the storytelling is such a key, it's such a key component of the work that we do because people need, it's, you know, if you hear about a retail boot camp, that is what it is. But if you hear somebody who went through that retail boot camp and they were able to transition their home business into a brick and mortar, it's got a different impact. You are putting a face, you have a location, and we have to tell that story not just to our funders who we want to continue to support us, but we also need to tell that story to entrepreneurs so they can see themselves in that story, and so that they can begin to think about how do we engage with the ecosystem to take our business to the next, make our business the next brick and mortar. So it's really twofold. It's taking those stories and with entrepreneurs and funders in mind, and telling those stories and making them fun in an age where, you know, it's everybody's like doom scrolling. How do we get that, you know, 60 seconds or 90 seconds on somebody's phone for them to listen to a story of an entrepreneur that's local to them?
But thank you. Really important question comes from Andy Stoll, who's just terrified to come off mute and ask it himself. So I'm going to ask it for him. In your experience, how do philanthropic funders think about metrics as it relates to ecosystem building, or how should they? What if we don't have metrics for trust and connective tissue?
I'm going to take that first because I want to answer the second part. How should they think about it? Because how they think about it, I'll let Pam talk about that. How should they think about it? I think they have to think about the connectivity of the ecosystem and the referrals and the outcomes of the working together. I think they need to look at how organizations are being collaborative, how organizations are supporting entrepreneurs collectively. There's a lot to be said about an entrepreneur who touches multiple ESOs to get to their outcomes, because they're never going to, each ESO is strong in usually in one area. Sometimes they've got a couple areas where they do things really well, but it's how do we bring all of those strengths and center the entrepreneur so that they have access to all of these resources? And funders don't think about that. Funders are like, show me how many jobs, show me, you know, how much revenue growth, and the trust and the collaboration is not something that funders are measuring. And I would love for them to think more holistically about the collaboration and the working together amongst ecosystem partners.
Ditto.
All right, nicely done. Thank you. And I think that was a great question. I'm scrolling through the chat a little bit because I feel like I maybe missed one or two as I jumped around in the chat. And there's a question coming from Raya in Baltimore. Can you share a little bit about any shift in philanthropic dollars over the 17, 18 years? And any reliance you may have on government support, which I think is an important question because we talked about this a little bit in prep for this and the status of it now. And do you have champions among the initial group of national funders who helped steer other foundations toward you in phases 2, 3, and I would say 4, if what we're in is phase 4 now?
Yeah, I'll take that and then I'll let Pam expand. So yes, we have champions who are some of the original funders. Specifically, I would say our two biggest champions are Hudson Weber, which is a much smaller foundation. They were one of the original funders. They continue to talk about the work that we do. They continue to be really good thought partners in this space, and to talk about the work moving forward. The other champion would be the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation. And the president of that foundation was the original executive director of NEI, and he continues to have a soft place in his heart for NEI and continues to talk about the work that NEI does. But as I mentioned earlier, there's always a push from funders to push us in the direction to meet their own priorities and their own strategy and their own data. And it's always this is our lane, this is the work that we want to do. So there's always a little bit of that push and pull from funders who want us to, check their boxes, which I completely understand from their perspective. And then Pam, I'll let you talk about the progression of the funders. And we've had funders drop off when, their strategies change and it no longer fits. And we're always looking for new funders who are aligned with the work that we do and want to support the ecosystem building in Southeast Michigan.
Yeah, I personally think it's something short of a miracle that Wafa and the team has been able to maintain a core group of funders. This is 18 years. Philanthropy does not typically do this. So it has evolved. I can't remember the question, but I do think it comes down to who is at that funder table, keeping the other ones at the table alongside with Wafa to make that happen. One of the foundations, Kellogg in particular, actually reserved $5 million of their first $25 million for an endowment, right? The genius of Miriam Nolan, which we didn't understand at the time, was that she didn't allow us to touch that endowment for 15, 16 years. I think they've just started to draw down on it. So that endowment was allowed to grow because we would have went through that thing if we had been allowed to touch it prior to that time. And then also sitting in a community foundation, you have the benefit of donor advised funds. So you could start to then cultivate the story to individual donors that can now use their donor advised funds at the community foundation to support this work. One of the things we always envisioned was supporting business is really the business of government. And philanthropy wants to use this to catalyze how a proof point that business can be supported and they can grow and do real things when more types of people are driving those businesses. And the dream that we once had was that government, this could be handed off to government to do, right? In this moment in time, it's probably good that NEI didn't rely on a lot of government funding because that government funding probably would have been frozen by now, right? So, but you don't know, right, what's going to happen. I think the point is you need diverse types of funding. And if you can, I feel like for the tech side of it, you got to get private sector funding in play, corporations, you know, VC funds, et cetera, family offices. But on the small business side, I believe philanthropy, especially when you're talking about distressed communities and disadvantaged business owners, it's going to be up to philanthropy. And all of us that are in this space are continuing trying to make the case to keep philanthropy interested in that. This is what Ife does every doggone day of her life. So it's, you know, it's not an easy work, but it's just meaningful.
Real quick technical thing, and I will say, Pam, if you want to call on somebody to answer this particular question, you should maybe call on Andy. It's my recommendation. A little bit of an explanation about what is a donor advised fund and how it is different from family or corporate foundations.
Andy could take it, Wafa could take it at the Community Foundation.
Wafa, you take it. But maybe I'll let you take that one out, Wafa, and then Pam, you could give us an example of how that
Okay.
could look in an ecosystem building work. Because I think there's a lot of people on this call that don't understand the difference between a corporate foundation, a family
Okay.
foundation, and a advised fund. Now's the opportunity to figure.
All right. So a donor advised fund is money that an individual puts into the community foundation, and they get to decide how to spend that money. It has to go to nonprofits. It has to be spent to a 501c3, but the donor is an individual who controls that money. Corporate philanthropy is a corporation who creates a 501c3 and they give that money. But generally with donor advised funds, they spend the money however they want. They usually have an affinity to something. And sometimes they might just give the money to organizations they know. So it's so incredibly important for them. The storytelling for the donor advised funds is key here. They don't know what they don't know. And generally ecosystem building and these organizations like NEI, we're not out there in front of high net worth individuals, and those high net worth individuals are generally the ones with donor advised funds, and giving them exposure to these organizations is key, because these are just individuals who happen to have a lot of money, and you know they want the tax incentives of the donor advised fund, and so you need to give them a compelling reason to give you their money.
Pam, let me add one other thought, which is in our next session 2, featuring Don Mackey from E2 Entrepreneurial Ecosystems. Don's going to be talking a lot more about donor advised funds, and anyone can create a donor advised fund, even you. And those can be created at your local community foundation. And most community foundations are happy to start one as long as you do the fundraising for it. And so one of the opportunities that we'll talk about in the next session is how you can get entrepreneurs who are successful in your community, who maybe don't have their own foundation, to pool their money in a donor advised fund. As Wafa said, they get a tax deduction for it. And oftentimes folks with high net worth, and I've seen this in many communities, is they would like to give it to entrepreneurship, but that's not charitable, as Pam discussed earlier. So it's not an automatic tax deduction. It's much easier to give to the arts or the education or the schools, because it's immediately tax deductible. But you can create a donor advised fund, and Don will share stories how he's done that in a number of communities, specifically to support entrepreneurship, and multiple entrepreneurs can basically give back to the community. Pam, do you have any examples of how a donor advised fund? I know you've probably done multiple levels, whether you with NEI or in your current work, where you've seen that work in a way that could actually fund ecosystem building.
Well, I think Wafa, Mary, you can keep me honest, but there's a donor advised fund at the Community Foundation that had a mission to support entrepreneurship. And it's not a lot of money, but it's significant, but it's still meaningful, right? Another example at the Community Foundation here in Pittsburgh, there's a family, I think it's called the Segal family, who decided to start a loan fund for disadvantaged entrepreneurs. And so that donor advised fund is teaming up with Honeycomb Credit, right, to identify and source small loans to disadvantaged entrepreneurs through Honeycomb Credit's tool. Honeycomb Credit is a crowdfunding lending platform. That's another example. So that's different than, you know, a family foundation like ours in Pittsburgh, where we have very broad grant making strategy from entrepreneurship to community health to health and human services that has to spend a certain percentage of our assets in southwestern Pennsylvania. So to Andy's point, there's so many different models of where funding comes from. At the base of it is, how do you make the case for the charitable purpose of entrepreneurship? Because this is new. I mean, NEI in Northeast Ohio were one of the first regions to think about this. And now a lot of more foundations are starting to learn about it. But the more we can make the case for it and tie it to charitable purpose, the more we can help educate people on how to support this type of thing.
I'll mention, I heard a really beautiful story about a donor advised fund from a gentleman who put funds into a donor advised fund and then recruited individuals who were in the ecosystem in that community to actually direct where those dollars go, so that he had the power to not only fund there, but really share that power with them in terms of really identifying the needs, which I think is was a really beautiful thing to see from that high net worth individual making that choice and recognizing that they had that knowledge and experience. All right, this is where I'm going to say to throw Andy into a panic and say to folks, is there someone whose question I missed in the chat, or that Andy and I missed in the chat, who needs to unmute and just scream it out now? Oh, here we go. Thank you, Heather. I knew I had seen something. Have you succeeded in creating some consistent processes and materials among ESOs, BSOs? Unified voice through toolkits, client data sharing, BizGrid still used a lot. So no wrong door to the ecosystem, but some consistency of procedure.
Yes, I love this question. And maybe I should bring Lily back to talk about this, but yes, we have lots of toolkits. We have lots of client data sharing. We are in the process of working with SourceLink to bring on a new digital platform to help with like the client data sharing. So yes, this is incredibly important, and all of those toolkits and all of that information is on the NEI website.
I'll mention that Lindsay shared in the chat because there was definitely some questions around measuring of trust, and shared a link to a resource there. But thoughts on where you've seen trust measured well from either of you?
I've got nothing on that.
Nope.
So
yeah, I think I've never seen any tool that helps you measure trust. You just experience it over time, you know. And I mean, even on this call, I think you can sense it, right? You know, I mean, Wafa has, you know, and Mary and Chanel and Lily, they've built trust, not just among themselves, among the funders, among the ESO providers. You just feel it, but the convening and the conversations and the working on problems together, which is what the NEI work table does, the neighborhood work table does, start to build that trust. I don't know how you measure it. You just have to have the patience and the duty of work to do the things that cultivate it. I don't know how to answer that question any other way.
Okay. Oh, I see a hand up.
And I think, Andy, don't you have to do a commercial for the
Andy
next?
has to do a commercial. Andy, do we have the time for
Oh,
this
yeah.
one last question?
Rosanna, if I'm saying that correctly, I happy. Way to raise your hand and share your.
Now that I'm reading the name, I know I saw that in her name in the chat somewhere. So
Yes,
shout it
hi.
out.
This is Rosanna with the Clara Lionel Foundation. And you might have touched on this, but I'm just curious, within your mission funders, do you have providers that are providing grants, meaning free money to these entrepreneurs, or just loans?
So basically, the large foundations are putting grants into the community foundation. NEI is making grants to nonprofits. However, there are programs that have happened where direct dollars are going to small businesses as grants. But if NEI is putting money into a CDFI, that's going out as loans. So it's been a mix.
Okay. Okay, and my other question, my follow-up question with that is, at what stage in their businesses are the entrepreneurs getting support? At all stages, or are you focused on acceleration or just idea creation? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
It's at all the stages. You know, we have, I showed you that really chaotic chart early on in the presentation that shows all of our nonprofit organizations that we're supporting, and and each one of them does something different. So supports businesses at a different stage. So we are supporting all the stages, and we're always looking to see where there's gaps that we can continue to fill. So we're looking to support entrepreneurs, whether they're starting a home-based business or whether they're looking to grow and, you know, take their pickle business national. So it's really across the board.
Thank you.
Andy, we're going to kick it to you. And before we do that, I just want to say thank you for creating the space for us to come together and have this conversation.
Yes, thank you everybody for creating the space for coming together. As a sort of way to wrap this up, I will ask one more question of both, actually, if all three of you, if you want, which is in a pithy way, like a tweet level way, like a short sentence. What advice do you have either for foundations, because there's a couple dozen or a dozen foundations on this, or people who want to approach foundations to support entrepreneurial ecosystem building? Do you have any pithy, right on the back of a t-shirt, fit on post-it note advice about whether they're a foundation interested or already funding ecosystem building, or somebody that wants to go talk to their foundation folks to do that? Who wants to go first?
I'm going to say I would put on the back of a t-shirt, give NEI all your money.
Okay.
Well, seeing that I'm in Pittsburgh now, I can't agree with that one anymore. But that's a good one. I guess I would say we can do hard things. And I stole that off of David Poneraj, Economic Impact Catalyst, and Leslie Smith, who used to work at TechTown. And the key word there is we. So, you know, in hard, you know, we can do hard things, but so you have to do it together. And I guess the point would be, you know, if you care about individuals having a path to opportunity that's beyond jobs, considering that so many people that are disadvantaged find that path through entrepreneurship. In the same way that we invest and think about startups and tech and life science and AI and robotics, why not think about that same path for a small business? You know, and because it's going to, like Don said, it's going to uplift the entire community. And it's hard, but we can do hard things. And that's stolen from David Poneraj and Leslie Smith.
Pam was wearing a much bigger t-shirt when she wrote all that for her t-shirt.
Yeah, there were the coattails on that t-shirt.
There's already a t-shirt with it on there. I have the t-shirt. I got it from David.
If you do want to wrap this up, but also can you transition that in to invite folks who may be potential members or future members of EFN, just to help folks understand if they know a funder in their network or they are a funder, a little bit about EFN.
I will 100% invite everybody here. If you're a funder, please reach out and come in. Like, you see the cool, amazing work of folks who are part of this network. And so this is a network that you should be part of. And for folks on here who are not funders, but you have relationships with your funders, encourage them. Because I will say, I think it's been a really beautiful thing to watch what happens in the room with funders. And so you want your funders to better understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, what you need. A great way to do that is get them in the room with other funders like Pam and Wafa, who will help make that case with you. I will say, like, my quick thing that I would say to funders is that they need to boldly and bravely lean into the power that they have collectively to really make amazing change, because this is what happens when you do it.
And Iffy, where can we find more about Entrepreneurship Funders Network, or what's the best way to get in touch with you? People.
The best way, I will drop my actual email into the chat so people can find me there. And I will also drop a link to our website in the chat too. So nobody's later being like, did she say e-ship? Did she say entrepreneurship? What is it? So I will put it into the chat to everyone, not just to Andy. You can find out more about us there and visit our website, and please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in here now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Iffy, for hosting us. Pam, Wafa, Don, Lily, everyone else from NEI, thank you for sharing your stories. We will share out the video and the chat transcript after the fact, and it sounds like the slides as well. As everyone is wrapping up, I have two quick 30-second announcements of the future sessions, but if you learned something today that impacted you, can you just put a sentence or a quick bit in the chat? Because I always love to share that back with the speakers so they can see after the fact. If you learned something, put it into the chat and you can say thanks that way. Very briefly, and I'll wrap up here, is there's more if you enjoyed this series. And the next one will be May 22nd. For those of you who are planning ahead, you can see Don Mackey, who I mentioned. I think he's the godfather of rural entrepreneurial ecosystem building. He's been doing the work for almost 50 years. He's going to share some models that involved tax revenue, economic development dollars, and donor advised funds. I think Don's the pioneer of this work, particularly in rural communities, but it will serve communities of all sizes. I think the work NEI did in Detroit is as singular as Don's work is in rural communities. So Don will be joining us on the 22nd. Also, our third session will be on June 19th. For those of you interested in startups, tech innovation, Linda Olson from Tampa Bay Wave, who has now collectively raised $1 billion for their startups in Tampa. Is going to talk about how they fund the programs to raise the $1 billion for startups, or to help the startups raise $1 billion. And Mark Lawrence from the Startup Champions Network will be hosting that session. We'll have a fourth session from Make Startups on July 10th as well, around workforce dollars and ESO funding related to ecosystem building. More to come on that. If you want to learn more, ebln.us/speakers. Thank you again for coming and joining us today and being part of this session. If you learned something from our speakers today, please share it in the chat. And we will do the final sign off as we do in EBLN land, which is we're all going to come off mute and you're going to say thank you, goodbye, whatever you want to say in your way, in your culture, in your language, in your words, however you say it where you are. So if we could all come off mute and on the count of three, thank our speakers and thank each other for creating the space in your language, your words, your way of being, and then we'll sign off. Are we ready? 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. And what up, though, from Detroit?
Exactly.